Okay, I'm going to read another chapter from The Clue in the Crumbling Wall. And this chapter, okay, is chapter 9. And it is called The Pointing Finger. Let's see how long it is here. Okay, I think we should be able to do this. All right. Nancy and her friends stared at the no trespassing sign, scarcely believing their eyes. It had not been there at the time of their previous visit. Obviously, it was intended to discourage just such persons as themselves from entering the grounds. "Someone must have seen us here," muttered George in disgust. "Nancy, you were right when you thought you saw a man peering at us from behind the evergreen." "This puts an end to our exploring," Bess said, disappointed. "We'll have to eat our picnic lunch some other place." Nancy was not so easily discouraged. She argued that if they were going to help Mrs. Fenimore and Joan, they would have to do better than Hector Keep had in locating the missing dancer. And no signs were going to keep her from hunting for necessary clues. I like her spirit. "It's most important that we try to find Floriana," she assured her companions. "If the fortune is saved, it probably will mean that Joan and her mother will be provided for." "They certainly need help," said Bess. "But dare we trespass here?" "I really have police sanction to do so. Lieutenant Masters urged me to take the case," Nancy replied. I wonder if that's an interpretation that's on or off. "Then I guess it's all right," said George. She had walked to the rusty gate to peer between the spikes. The grounds seemed as deserted as ever, but as Nancy and Bess joined her, the girls were startled to hear the sudden barking of dogs. Hold on here. Okay. "Listen," Nancy exclaimed. An instant later, she added, "They're inside the grounds. And coming closer," Bess said uneasily. "They must have heard our car stop here at the gate. Well, that settles it," she declared almost in relief. "We can't possibly go inside now. We might be chewed to pieces." She turned as if to go back to the car. Oh, that was Bess talking. No, I think that was, because Bess doesn't want to go. Okay, so that was Bess saying, "We can't possibly go inside now. We might be chewed to pieces." She turned as if to go back to the car. George and Nancy lingered by the gate, reluctant to leave. That makes more sense. Soon they glimpsed two large black and white hounds through the bushes. "Ugly-looking brutes," George commented. "Evidently they've been left here to guard the grounds." Seeing the intruders, the dogs began to bark louder than ever. One of them came to the gate, and with his front paws on the iron bars growled fiercely at Nancy. Instead of retreating, the girl spoke kindly to him and held out her hand. "Aww." "Hello, old fellow," she said soothingly. "When did you come to live here?" To the amazement of Bess, the animal began to whine in a friendly fashion and wag his tail. Reaching a hand through the gate, Nancy patted his head. "Be careful," Bess warned her sharply. To the surprise of the cousins, the other dog had stopped barking and now came forward. Nancy patted his head also and talked to him. "These dogs aren't vicious," she said, elated. "Girls, I'm sure we can explore the grounds safely." "I'm willing to try if you are," George offered. Bess was afraid of the dogs and said so, but "I'll come along," she agreed. "I'll go first," Nancy offered courageously. "If they don't attack me, it will be safe for you two to follow." George and Bess watched uneasily as their friend climbed the crumbling wall. On the ledge, she hesitated a moment. The dogs had set up a loud barking again. Nancy realized that for the animals to be friendly while on the opposite side of an enclosure was one thing. For them to let anyone enter the grounds was another. "Don't attempt it," Bess called nervously. "Please." Nancy spoke gently but firmly to the hounds. Then, taking a chance, she began to lower herself very gradually. One of the dogs came straight toward the girl. Her heart began to beat wildly, but she showed no outward fear. "Well, old fellow," she murmured, "do I come in?" To her relief, the animal ceased barking and displayed only a friendly interest in her. "It's all right," Nancy called to her chums. "Come on over." She continued to pat the hounds and talk to them as George climbed the wall and leaped down. The dogs did not try to molest her. As soon as Bess's head appeared, however, they began to snarl. "Don't mind them," Nancy called encouragingly. "They're only testing your nerve." "They'll tear me to pieces if I jump down there." Oh, Bess was so nervous that she was almost in tears. "They'll leave you alone if you don't show any fear," Nancy assured her. It was impossible for the frightened girl to do this. "Go on without me," she said after 2 vain attempts. "Those dogs just don't like me. I'll wait in the car." "All right," Nancy agreed. "Don't eat up all the lunch while we're gone." She and George set off alone. The dogs remained behind. Soon the girls located the avenue of trees which led past the ruined loggia. "Here is a path that I'm sure will lead to the castle," Nancy remarked as they came to a forking trail. "Maybe," smiled George, "but this sign reads, 'To the Fairy Gallery.'" "Let's see where it goes anyway," urged Nancy. They passed a weather-stained statuette in a wall niche, lingered a moment to gaze at a rose garden choked with weeds, then went on to a clearing. Before them rose an artistic structure. The sides were formed of slender, twisted stone columns, while sprawling over them was a roof of untrimmed vines supported by thick stalks. From one end of the shelter hung a rustic sign on which were the words, "Who enters here may fairies meet, with laughter soft they should be greet." "How pretty," said Nancy dreamily. "Joan Fenimore would adore it here. Incidentally, I'd love to meet a fairy who would reveal the secrets we want to know." George, surveying the gallery closely, remarked practically, "It looks as if Father Time had taken over here instead of the fairies," adding that the stone columns looked as if they might tumble down at any minute. Nancy stooped to inspect the base of one of the pillars, saying that she was amazed stone could be damaged so greatly by weather. "George," she exclaimed suddenly, "will you look at this?" "What is it?" "Someone has deliberately tampered with these columns. See the marks on the stone? They've been weakened, probably with a pickaxe." "It does seem that way, Nancy, but why would anyone do that?" As the girls inspected the other columns, Nancy spoke of the note she had found at the old button factory and the words, "In a wall." "I'm sure someone is searching in various walls for an article of value," she said. "What it is, I have no idea." "But why destroy these lovely columns? Maybe the person didn't find what he wants in any of the regular walls and is now looking in the columns. Oh, if only I had the missing half of the message." George was not listening very closely to her friend's words. Instead, she was gazing down the path as if transfixed. "What do you see?" Nancy asked in a low voice. "Those dogs aren't coming back, are they?" The other girl shook her head, pointing toward the bushes. Nancy could make out nothing unusual. "It's an old man," George whispered. "He's pointing his finger at us." Nancy was startled, too, as she saw the man amid the heavy shrubbery. Her pulse quickened, but she moved toward the figure. Nearing it, she laughed softly. "Why, it's only a life-size statue, George!" Decidedly embarrassed by her mistake, the crestfallen girl went over to inspect the figure. "That pointing figure may have a special significance," Nancy remarked thoughtfully, noting that the direction indicated was along a path. "Let's follow this and see where it takes us." The trail had been nearly obliterated by weeds. It twisted in and out among the trees and seemed to lead nowhere. The girls were about to turn back when Nancy spied the flash of water in filtered sunlight. It proved to be a large, stagnant pool clogged with water lilies. George went over to inspect it. "Why do you suppose the statue pointed to this?" she speculated. "It doesn't look like any—" Her words were ended in a little scream, as the soft bank beneath the girl's feet gave way. Before Nancy could make a move to save her friend, she had slipped into the water. It proved not to be deep, but George was soaked. "Look at me, I'm a mess," she cried, struggling to her feet. "Now what am I to do?" Nancy helped her chum scramble up the slippery bank. Gazing about her, she noticed a stone house nearby. Apparently, it had once been used as a tool shed. Go in there and get out of your wet clothes, she advised George. I'll dry them in the sun for you. It shouldn't take long. This appeared to be the only solution, so the wet girl disappeared into the stone house. She tossed breeches, blue riding shirt, stockings, and shoes through an open window. Nancy spread them on the bank in the sun and started walking around the pond. On the bank close by, she noticed a whelk shell, which evidently had been dislodged from the bottom of the pond by George's fall. At first glance, Nancy gave it no thought. Then it occurred to her that it was unusual it should be there. After a moment's thought, Nancy stripped off shoes and stockings and waded into the shallow water. Dipping her hands into the sand, she discovered that the bottom of the pond was thick with discarded whelk shells. This is strange, she mused, finding these so far from the factory. They couldn't have come from there, and certainly the Heaths wouldn't have eaten this many. Still trying to figure out a logical answer to the puzzle, she returned to the bank and sat down. Suddenly a thought came to her. Me Hardy had said that whelks were used in making fine dyes. Walter Heath had spent much of his time on scientific experiments. Was it not reasonable to suppose that the estate owner had been using whelks to perfect some kind of dye for use at the button factory? Hey, why so pensive? George called, interrupting Nancy's thoughts. See if my clothes are dry, will you? She's in there and she doesn't have any clothes on. Nancy obediently arose and felt of George's garments. Not yet, she reported. I'm getting hungry, complained George, and Bess will be having a fit if we don't get back. In this she was right. Hungry herself and tired of waiting, Bess was fuming in Nancy's concealed car. As the sun climbed high overhead and the others failed to return, the girl became annoyed. Guess they've forgotten me, she thought. To add to her irritation, the hounds came dashing back to the gate when she walked over to look through it. Seeing her, they bayed savagely. Just wait until I see George and Nancy, Bess stormed. Just then she heard a car coming up the road. Bess barely had time to hide herself in the bushes before it swung around the bend. She was glad that she had hidden herself, for she was sure from Nancy's description that the driver was none other than Hector Keep. He was alone. To the girl's dismay, he got out and walked all around, thereby spotting Nancy's car. The man muttered something that Bess could not hear. Finally, he went to the double gate and unlocked it. He's going to drive into the grounds, Bess told herself. Nancy and George will be caught trespassing. Oh, I must warn them. Fairly beside herself with anxiety, the girl did not know what to do. Hector Keep still had his back turned toward her. The sedan, its engine running, was not 10 feet away. There was no time to think or plan. Impulsively, Bess darted to the car. Climbing into the back part, she crouched on the floor. Hector Keep returned to the automobile. Unaware of his passenger, he drove through the gates into the estate grounds. Wow. It's getting exciting. We're 78 pages in, and the total book is 217. So we're making a little headway here in terms of reaching the the middle, and I may have to read a couple of extra chapters so that we can stay up with this. So I hope you enjoyed reading this. I enjoyed it. I've never having read Nancy Drew before. I'm enjoying it. I like the clam focus. I'm interested in and the use of clams to make buttons. That's very interesting too. So have a wonderful day.